Now when Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea in the days of Herod the king, there came wise men from the east, saying, Where is he that is born King of the Jews? For we have seen his star in the east. What star did they see? Who are these magi, anyway? Gary Stearman is here to discuss with me the star that astonished the world.
Well, J.R., those magi, in fact, the name magi gives us our word magician. Today it's a corruption. The magi were doing something approved of God. He led them to the Christ child. They brought gifts. There's an injunction against being an observer of times. Deuteronomy 18:10, J.R., says, There shall not be found among you anyone that maketh his son or daughter pass through the fire, or that useth divination, or an observer of times. Now that's more like what we call astrology today.
That would be the horoscope, wouldn't it?
The horoscope.
Like, don't get out of bed today if you're a Leo.
Tells you whether you're going to have good or bad luck, or whether you're going to come into money or whatever. Right. That's forbidden. But what the Magi were doing, J.R., has a tradition that goes back, I think, prior to the flood. I think the information was given probably to Adam, that the sign of the Redeemer, the one who would come to redeem mankind, is written in the stars. Yeah. And in fact, we find this throughout Scripture. It's an idea that is laced all the way through Scripture.
According to the first century Jewish historian Flavius Josephus, God gave to Seth, the son of Adam, and to Seth's sons, this science that deals with the heavenly bodies and their movements. And from it, they were able to determine predictions or prophecies of the future. In fact, in Genesis chapter 1, verse 14, the Bible tells us that God put the stars in the heavens for signs. And so these magi who came looking for the star saw something. Listen to verse 9. When they heard the king, they departed, and lo, the star which they saw in the east went before them till it came and stood over where the young child was. Now, Gary, is this a star that moved like an airplane or a helicopter or a UFO through the sky and came down and hovered over the house? Is this what he's talking about here, or is there an alternative explanation?
Well, you know, traditionally, I've even heard it said that maybe this was something like an angel with a torch, you know, who flew through the heavens ahead of them, which is, you know, not unthinkable. But on the other hand, the tradition of the Magi was observation of the regal or royal signs in the heaven, particularly the house of Leo, the lion, and the star Regulus, which is called the King's Star. And they watched for what happened in that house, because they had been taught for centuries, maybe for millennia. Their tradition goes back that one would be born when the signs were right in the house of the king. And so we're not talking about a moving star like an airplane. We're talking about a heavenly body moving in a particular way.
Virgo the Virgin has 3 decans. The first one is coma. According to ancient sightings, ancient writings and drawings, especially in Egypt, this is a picture of the Virgin who has a son. In fact, let me read it to you here from Joseph Seiss, The Gospel in the Stars. On page 28, it begins, Albumazer, who was not a Christian, says, quote, There arises in the first decan as the Persians, Chaldeans, and Egyptians, and the two, Hermes and Asclepius, teach, a young woman whose Persian name denotes a pure virgin, sitting on a throne, nourishing an infant boy, said boy having a Hebrew name, by some nations called Jesus. The signification, Isa, which in Greek is called Christ. So we have here the very name of Jesus attached to this infant in coma, the first decan of Virgo.
And what's amazing to me is that even in pagan ancient temples, now we're talking about pagan temples, temples of the Egyptians, we have that sign, the sign of the Virgin and the child who would be born. It's kind of fascinating to me that God gave even the Gentiles, the nations, the opportunity to witness the birth of Messiah.
It goes on to say, the celebrated zodiac of Dendera, that would be in Egypt, brought by the French to Paris under Napoleon, contains a decan of Virgo, which also gives the picture of a woman holding an infant, which she is contemplating and admiring. And so this idea of the child of Virgo goes all the way back to ancient pagan zodiacs.
And in very simple terms, what we're talking about here is the birth of Jesus. You know, we talked about the proofs of the time of the birth of Jesus. Luke chapter 3 talks about Jesus' public ministry beginning in AD 28, the 15th year of Tiberius. John chapter 2 talks about Jesus' public ministry beginning in the 46th year of the building of Herod's temple. That would be AD 28. We talked about the fact that AD 28 is also a sabbatical year when Jesus began his public ministry. And all of these dates, if you just count back 30 years, converge on 3 BC. And Dr. Ernest L. Martin, in this remarkable new book, The Star That Astonished the World, pinpoints the time of Jesus' birth, as a matter of fact, to September 11th, 3 BC. And J.R., there was a new moon at the time, and there was a star conjunction in Regulus between the feet of Leo the lion, which the Magi would have recognized as the coming of a new king. And he talks about all of these signs in Leo, and then he says, what new moon could this have been? The answer is most amazing. It is almost too amazing. September 11th, 3 BC was Tishri 1 in the Jewish calendar. Now that happens to be Rosh Hashanah. And he says that's when Messiah was born. Well, again, that's 4 proofs we have now that 3 BC is a very, very significant year. And we're talking about really 2 royal houses here in the heavens. We're talking about the sign of Leo and Regulus, the king star, and then we're talking about Virgo, the virgin. And in one of the subdivisions of that constellation, there is the mother and the child.
In the 12th chapter of Revelation, there is a picture of Virgo, the woman, clothed in the sun with the moon under her feet. This would be Rosh Hashanah, the new moon of September. When the sun is in Virgo. So she's clothed in the sun and the moon is under her feet.
Okay, let's just quickly say that if you follow the way the stars move, when the sun is in a particular constellation, naturally you can't see it. The sun's too bright. And if the moon happens to be there too, well, you can't see the moon. It's a new moon. It's dark. And so we have in Revelation 12 the woman with the sun in her midst, or clothed with the sun, and then the new moon under her feet. That would be the new moon of Tishri 1. But J.R., she also has a crown of 12 stars.
Yes, and she's pregnant, and she's travailing in birth, and she gives birth to this baby. This is what we see in the first decan, Coma, the decan of Virgo. Now, a couple of years ago, we thought maybe this would be Jupiter, which for a few years was purported to have 12 stars. We know today that Jupiter has 16 stars.
16 moons are surrounding.
16 moons. And so we thought, well, maybe this is the crown of 12 stars. However, we did not consider the fact that in 1 AD there were not 12 months, that there was no 0 year. And so we had to move the birth back to 3 BC. But what kind then of crown of 12 stars could we possibly see in her head? Well, listen to what happened back in the, I'd say about 125 years before the birth of Christ, all to about 150 years after the birth of Christ, 275 years in there, there was a spectacular supernova in the head of the child in Virgo's lap. And here's what Joseph Seiss says about it. Now, as a matter of record, that a new and peculiar star did make its appearance in the first decan of Virgo in the period immediately preceding Christ's birth, and that it was so bright as to be visible even in the daytime. Ignatius said it sparkled brilliantly above all stars. The same continued in the sky during the whole period of Christ's lifetime and for a time thereafter. Hipparchus, who lived in Alexandria, Egypt, he was part of the Greek Empire, 125 years BC, observed it as a new star and was led by it to draw up his catalog of stars. Ptolemy, about 150 years after Christ, refers to it as having been observed by Hipparchus, but as having become so faint as to hardly any longer be distinguishable.
And now, go back, J.R., to Matthew chapter 2, and look at what the Magi saw.
So they saw this star that went before them till it came and stood over where the young child was. Could this be the supernova in the head of the child of Coma? We'll be back in just a moment. Traditionally, it is thought that the star that went before the Magi and stood over the house where the young child was some kind of an angel or a movable light that came and pointed out the very house itself. But is it possible that this light they saw was the supernova in the head of Coma, the child in the lap of the Virgin?
You know, it's very possible, J.R., and in fact, the child occupies 1/3 of that particular constellation. There are 360 degrees in the heavens, 12 heavenly signs, giving each sign 30 degrees, and then within each 30-degree sign there are 3 decans, 10 degrees each, 10, 20, 30. And so the child occupies a very significant portion of that sign, which speaks of the virgin birth of Messiah. And J.R., that's a spectacular idea. And by the way, Dr. Martin, in his book, The Star That Astonished the World, goes into considerably more detail than we can here on this subject. But what I would like to really point out at this time is that we're really talking about an arrangement of prophecy that is first seen very clearly back in Genesis with the dream of Joseph. Joseph dreamed a dream, Genesis 37:9. He dreamed, and he told his brethren and said, "Behold, I have dreamed a dream more, and behold, the sun and the moon and the 11 stars made obeisance to me." Well, we know that these 11 stars are the 11 tribes beside Joseph, Joseph being the 12th star. Well, sun, moon, 12 stars, you have what's called in the Hebrew, Mazarot. It's called in modern English the zodiac, but what it is an arrangement of 12 signs in the heavens that tell time. And J.R., what's fascinating is God approves of watching for these signs. Jesus said, he told everyone to watch for great signs in the heavens in the latter days as his second coming drew nigh. What would these signs be?
Yeah, so Joseph talks about each of these stars representing the 12 boys.
Yes.
And also, of course, to each of the tribes of Israel were given a sign of the zodiac.
Yes.
And this is very easy to see. For example, it can be seen right here in The Witness of the Stars by E.W. Bullinger on page 18. The tabernacle here, Levi representing the scales here, and Judah was the lion, Leo, and Joseph would be Taurus, the bull, Ephraim and Manasseh, Taurus.
Yeah.
And so we can see that this was something that was not out of the ordinary.
Yeah,
it was common back in those
it's
days.
kind of fascinating. When the children of Israel were camped in the wilderness around the tabernacle, they were instructed to camp foursquare. 3 on each side, Levi in the middle, tabernacle in the middle. Levi serves the tabernacle. And this foursquare pattern goes all the way from the Torah to the book of Revelation. You get to the New Jerusalem. It's built on a foursquare design, J.R. It's let down from heaven. It has 3 gates in each side. It's that same pattern that we see over and over again in the 12 tribes circumscribed around the perimeter of the New Jerusalem. It's amazing.
You know, the fascinating thing is, Gary, each one of these constellations are called a house.
Yes.
Jesus referred to them in John 14 as mansions.
Mansions.
And each one of these houses has a door. So when we get to Revelation chapter 4 and John says, "I see a door open in heaven," which door? That is the question.
That would be the question, would it not?
That would sort of help date the rapture, wouldn't it?
It might indeed.
Unfortunately, we don't know which door. But there is a door every month through the year.
Yes. And by the way, we are going to do a little speculating from this point on, because if God deemed it proper to give an astronomical sign accompanying Jesus' birth, what about the astronomical signs concerning his second coming? Now we know that those signs are there. There's the woman clothed with the sun, the moon at her feet, the 12 stars around her as a crown, and I think that these have to do with those 12 houses, frankly, giving us a clue that something interesting is going to happen. Now, where should we go from here?
Well, in this generation, we have seen a number of interesting signs in the heavens, or at least you know, certain occultations, certain conjunctions. For example, in 1981, there was a triple conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn. And in this, as we come into this decade, there are a lot of really little neat things. For example, Jupiter and Venus figure very prominently in the first century, especially what scientists today have called the Christmas star. Where they were only 1/100th of a degree apart. In fact, the cover of this book shows Jupiter and Venus in the conjunction of what is called the Christmas star, June 17th, 3 BC. And they're just 1/100th of a degree apart. In fact, you can see just a little bit of the northern hemisphere of Venus over the southern hemisphere of Jupiter. That's close.
And
that's a close conjunction.
Just 3 months before the birth of Messiah, if the dating is correct.
Well, actually, this would be, he would be about 9 months old.
Yeah.
Okay, it may be, I'd say, 3 months or 4 months before the Magi came.
Before the Magi came, you're right.
Now, the interesting thing about this is that there have only been 17 of these conjunctions where Venus and Jupiter have been this close or closer in the past 2,000 years. But there is one coming up.
There is one coming up, and it's significantly placed at that year that we've all been waiting for, the year 2000.
Oh my. On the 17th of May, we're talking just a few weeks before Pentecost here. On the 17th of May, Jupiter and Venus will have a conjunction in Aries right at the door of Taurus, just entering into Taurus, just before entering into that door. And what a fantastic series of conjunctions there's going to be there, because Saturn is there as well. Jupiter and Saturn and Venus, they all three conjunct with each other during those days from the 17th of May to the 27th of May, 10 days there. There's going to be a spectacular display. The year 2000.
In the year 2000, and by the way, now we're talking about conjunctions here of Jupiter and Saturn. And Jupiter and Saturn have traditionally been, at least in the distant past, associated with the coming and going of great leaders, or a change, if you will, of dispensation. And that's precisely what we're talking about here. We are now in the church age, and we are, as students of Bible prophecy, looking toward that day that everybody knows is coming, but no one knows precisely when. That is, when this dispensation of the church changes to the dispensation of the kingdom.
Now, what is so fascinating about this is, at Rosh Hashanah in the year 2007, there's going to be another fantastic conjunction, and that would be between Saturn and Regulus. Now remember, Jupiter entered Regulus on the date of Jesus' birth, September 11th, 3 BC.
Right.
Well, here comes Saturn now, and Saturn is a very special little fella. In fact, he's said to be the father of Jupiter in the ancient cosmologies of the Greeks. And here, he is the reaper. He's the one that has the sickle in his hand. Well, you know, in Revelation chapter 14, it says, thrust in the sickle, the earth is ready to be reaped, the harvest is ripe. And is it possible then that this Rosh Hashanah in the year 2007 will be something special?
And that'll be, of course, a conjunction of Saturn with the king star. Saturn, also called Chronos, or the keeper of times. And Saturn is associated with a complete rollover of one time into the next time, or one era into the next era. So, J.R., the ancient wisdom of the Magi, certainly we don't know as much as they did. A lot of it's been lost, but we do know that God's gospel is written in the stars.
We know that Saturn has been used for the name of Saturday, and Saturday is the seventh day, the Sabbath, and we know that we're coming up on the introduction of the seventh millennium. This is Saturn's millennium, Gary.
Ah,
Isn't that
yes.
amazing?
We're going to be watching. And by the way, we would encourage you to look into the work of Dr. Ernest L. Martin, The Star That Astonished the World. This book goes into so much more detail than we have time.
And we'll be back in just a moment.